So good morning, everyone, and I hope you're all keeping well. Really warm welcome to this Mission Net Zero webinar. I'm tuning in from Cheltenham, not unfortunately from the fabulous setting of Gloucester Cathedral, which you may have wondered because it looked that way in your meeting links. But despite the lack of stained glass and extensive solar paneling in my environment here, I think we are definitely all going to be inspired. We've got a great panel for you this morning, so we can settle in for an interesting discussion over the next 2 hours. And we are recording this session, so the meeting is set up so that participants' microphones and cameras are off. But when we come to the Q&A, we are going to mainly use the chat box, but we will be able to bring you in voice-wise if we need to. So my name's Alex Ryan. I'm Director of Sustainability at the University of Gloucestershire. And as we get going, my first job is just to say thank you so much to our friends and partners at Gloucester Cathedral for inviting us to join this programme. This is the last webinar in a brilliant series called Hope for Creation, which has been working over the last couple of weeks around the Gaia art exhibition and installation at the cathedral. And the whole programme, from the webinar series to the installation itself, has been a real testament to the great work that the cathedral are doing on sustainability, real pioneers in the Church of England on this. So thank you all for joining us this morning. We've got sort of probably over 75 people who signed up to this webinar and may be in and out of it during the session. And they range from local authorities to NHS to sporting, education, cultural institutions, a range of private sector organisations. So we've got some really interesting people joining in this seminar today. And please bring us your experiences, bring us your questions into this discussion. The subtitle was about delivering positive climate action, because many of us and of you have a formal duty to try and actually progress this agenda. And it's a tough ask. We're all aware that, you know, there are pledges being made left, right, and centre about how organisations are going to do this and really make those huge cuts in their carbon emissions. But potentially there's a little bit of tension between declaring and actually decarbonising. So maybe that's going to come up in our conversation today. But I can tell you that the panelists and these organisations are all ones who have an absolutely genuine commitment to driving down their emissions to zero or as near as they can get it. So we wanted this session to be very practical in nature and to help all of us actually have a moment of space to think these issues through and get some insights and learning from each other. So before I say more, let me just say how grateful I am to the speakers. We've got some terrific people here and I've had the pleasure to work with all of them. And I'm so glad they could take time and join us to share the really important work that they are doing. So I wonder, folks, panelists, would you all switch your cameras on for a moment and we'll all have a little wave as I introduce you to the room. So in the order in which they will appear, first of all, we have Becky Gordon from Interface. We will then have Gary Thomas from Forest Green Rovers and also a bit of a double act from Ecotricity. We'll then have Cranston from Gloucester Cathedral. And then we'll have our own John Furley from University of Gloucestershire. Thank you very much, all of you. At the first webinar in this series, we heard from Lord Devon, which was really brilliant. Really fascinating look back to his time back in the 80s, in the Thatcher and Lawson era of how government was wrestling or not wrestling with climate change at that point. And as now chair of the Independent Committee on Climate Change for the UK, he was just sharing with us how this conversation now is not a question of if anymore, it is a question of how. And that's the real theme of our focus today is how can we actually get this work done in organizations? And in particular, the panel today are from larger organizations, quite disparate sectors, you know, different products, services, office spaces, different environments, different kinds of impact that they have to take account of. We've got a really rich mix here of different kinds of people and headaches that we can look into, but also some absolutely cracking progress being made. And of course, we're all looking at this in the context of the pandemic, and the pandemic, as we know, it's brought fierce financial difficulty and all manner of other difficulties to us, but it's also reminded us of our capacity to adapt rapidly in the face of an existential threat. And it's that sort of collective action that we all need to foster in our organizations, and also in how we work and collaborate and trade with each other across businesses in order to get this work done. And our panel have come together in that spirit of sharing and collaboration to share with you some of their own breakthroughs and struggles and insights. We've all got a lot to learn on this road. And, you know, I say that as someone who's responsible for the agenda in a university, and a university that pioneered sustainability. We said we were going to go further than greening our campus. We were going to look at our ultimate impact, which is the graduates that we send out into the world. And that's really big and noble and mighty of us, but my goodness, it certainly doesn't mean we've solved our carbon problems. We've still got legion ones of those, and the net zero agenda is going to take us further. We've kind of done okay so far, better than some universities, but we've got a long way to go, and a really big paradigmatic shift now to really tackle net zero in all its forms. I wouldn't be an academic if I didn't define terms for a moment. So just to be clear, that our focus here on carbon net zero is about all of us driving down our emissions, both direct and indirect impacts, to as low as they can go and offsetting a minimal amount possible. We're aware that there may be some out there who may be offsetting a rather lot more, and that's a conversation. But that is our understanding of mission net zero. So how's this going to work? We have allocated each of the speakers sort of up to 15 minutes to speak first. We're going to hear from two of them, and then we'll stop and have a little moment of conversation. Then we'll do two more and have a bit more conversation. We asked in the presentation slots for each of them to speak to the same 3 points, so that you could really get a feel of where they are all at on this agenda. We've asked them to tell you about their impacts and the goals to drive those impacts down. We've asked them to tell you about their performance so far and what's working, what's going well, what has worked well. We've also asked them to share what's the hardest bit and where are the struggles and where are the challenges. So we hope that's going to get us into some good conversation. How it will work for questions, if you would put questions in the chat box as we go along, and please throw in as many as you like. Obviously, we could all ask some questions ourselves, and so would the panelists, but we'll much prefer it if you've got some. And please just note to, when you share a little comment in the chat box, look at the little slot to select share with all panelists and attendees, and then we can all see the questions. My noble sidekick Miriam, who is much more technically whizzy than me, is hosting here for us and will chip in if me in particular, do any mistakes with our cameras and so on. We'll be shutting our own panelist cameras down when people are speaking, so that you can focus on their slides and their presentations. Is that everything that I need to tell people on the technical side? Miriam, do you need to jump in with anything? If not, we will commence.
No, that's covered it, thank you.
Okay, I'm stopping sharing my own welcome slide now, and I'm going to just very warmly introduce a really great friend and partner, Becky Gordon, who has just been promoted to leading, well, just about everything to do with sustainability in the UK, perhaps their interface these days, I think. We've had the great good fortune to work with Becky and colleagues at Interface for a couple of years now and done some terrific things. We feel honoured to work with this company, which is a known pioneer and one of those companies that got into this agenda very early and has really charted a course that other organizations can follow. We're going to be very inspired hearing from Interface about what they're doing on carbon neutral. And just to add to their many glories, they've literally just heard this week that they've been awarded one of the UN 2020 Global Climate Action Awards, one of only 4 companies to receive one in the category on driving down the carbon. And this all really terrific underscoring again this week of the wonderful work that they've done. So I'm going to disappear. Thank you very much, Becky. And I'll come and tune in when it's time to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. So firstly, thanks for having me here today. It's really, really great to see more and more events around carbon. It's such an important topic, and I think that increasingly it's more and more on the agenda. So let's get going. Today, I want to talk to you about Interface's goals around carbon, where we are today, where we're going, and some of the challenges that we face on the way. So firstly, what are our goals? Interface have had the benefit of addressing our sustainability since the early 90s. Our founder, Ray Anderson, set us on a journey to have no negative impact on the environment. But the challenges that we face today are very different to the challenges in the 90s. And it became clear that we needed a new mission and a new focus. And in 2016, we did just that. We launched our mission called Climate Take Back. It consists of 4 pillars. Just to touch on them briefly, the first is to live zero, so to continue towards having no negative impact on the planet. To lead the industrial re-revolution, so to collaborate with businesses and other companies like we've never done before. To let nature cool, to let nature do what it does best, restoring the balance of the climate. But finally, the final pillar is love carbon. And this pillar is the one that we see as critical. It's time to stop viewing carbon as the enemy and to start seeing it as a building block. So in terms of how that translates into a goal for Interface, we've set the aim to be a carbon negative enterprise by 2040. And as a company that makes a product, it's a big task. We've got lots and lots to do to get there, and we need to establish what our focus should be, and that should be our biggest area of impact. And for us, as a manufacturer, we take raw materials and we turn them into a product. We turn them into flooring. This is a main contributor to our carbon footprint. And it's key for us to realise and address, as reducing the carbon footprint of our products will have the biggest impact on reducing our overall footprint. It isn't to say that we shouldn't address other areas. We should, and we do. But it allows us to focus on the area where we can make a real difference. Once we've established that it's our products that we need to prioritise, we need to understand the life cycle of our actual products. And this is a key point, and it'll help us take the right steps to reduce our carbon footprint. So this is our product life cycle. It goes from raw materials, transport, manufacturing. It then leaves the factory gate and is transported again, installed, used, and finally disposed of at the end of life. Within this life cycle, each stage has a different impact on the carbon footprint. Historically for us, the biggest issue has always been our raw materials. This is the part with the much, much higher carbon footprint, much higher than the transport or the use of our products. Carpet yarn is made from nylon, which is petrochemical based, obviously leading to a huge carbon footprint. Another thing we need to consider is that when we look at this life cycle of our products, there are 3 areas that Interface have a really good amount of control over. And these are the raw materials, the transport to the factory, and the manufacturing, otherwise known as cradle to gate. Once the product leaves our factory, we have much less control over the emissions associated with it. So that tells you about our plans and a little bit about where we've chosen to focus. But let's see how we're doing. So these are our latest ecometrics, which we release annually. You can see that we've made loads and loads of progress with our carpet production in Europe. We make the product with 100% renewable energy. We've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 96% since 1996. And we've reduced the carbon footprint of our carpets by 74%, again since 1996. And these are all big and exciting numbers. But in more recent years, since our climate take-back mission was launched, we've had a bit more of a specific plan around carbon and our products. This timeline shows the progress we've made so far. Only a year after we started to focus on carbon, we were experimenting with carbon negative materials in concept products. So similar to having a concept car, we created concept carpet tiles. They weren't commercially available, but we proved we had the technology to create them. The next year, we made the decision that all our products should be carbon neutral. We then had major investments in a new backing line that could bring new and exciting backings, which has led to the launch of a new backing this year. I'll touch on a few of these stages now in a little bit more detail. So in 2018, we launched carbon neutral floors. We reduce the footprint of our flooring as much as we can right now, and then we offset the part that's currently too difficult to remove. What's really important to me is that we didn't restrict the offsets to the cradle to gate elements, the bit before the product leaves the factory, the bits that we have most control over. We calculated beyond that for the entire life cycle, and we offset the whole lot. This means that whatever floor our customers choose from Interface, whether it's carpet, LVT or luxury vinyl tile, or our Nora rubber product, is all carbon neutral for the entire life cycle. And this is important because it means that we aren't restricting sustainable choices to certain designs or price points. It means that we're taking an approach that is across our entire portfolio. So we've made all the products carbon neutral, and it's a huge step, but we don't want to stop there. Over the past 25 years, we've been lowering our footprint by trying to end our dependency on oil. This image may be a little bit small on your screens to see the detail, but it shows some of the innovations that we've had over the years, from Ray Anderson, who's our founder, on the left-hand side, to our latest products launched only last week on the right. Through design, innovation, circular thinking, and supply chain collaboration, we've worked to reduce this dependency, and we're now able to offer products with a much higher content of recycled and bio-based materials. In turn, this dramatically reduces the carbon footprint. And all of these innovations are great, but in the last year or so, it really feels like we're starting to do something incredibly exciting with our raw materials. The first of these is a new backing called Sequest Bio, which we launched only last week. It's a biocomposite, which is created from bio-based and recycled fillers. These are carbon negative materials, and using them locks carbon into our product and further reduces the carbon footprint. This is really exciting because on average, it decreases the carbon footprint of a product by over a third. And it also means that the recycled and bio-based content of products on the Sequest Bio backing can jump to over 90%, which is huge. And as Alex mentioned, our work on carbon hasn't gone unnoticed. In incredibly exciting news, Interface have just been awarded the UN Global Climate Action Award for our efforts in reducing the carbon footprint of our products. Getting an award from the UN is not something that happens every day, and it's something that we're all immensely proud of. So I think you can see that we've come really far, but we aren't finished there, and there's still lots of work to do. So I just want to give you a little glimpse now at what lies ahead. So this is our journey. We've reduced our footprint, we offer the products as carbon neutral, and we're at the very start of our adventure with carbon negative materials. Firstly, we need to get our new backing onto as many products as possible to really emphasize the impact of that backing. As I said earlier, we want to have that impact across the entire portfolio rather than relying on eco-hero products. We've started with all the products that you see on screen. So all the products on screen now come with their Sequest Bio backing as standard. It's not a sustainable choice that people have to make. it is on it as standard. But we want to expand this to more and more products. And eventually, Sequest Bio will become our standard backing for all our products across the entire portfolio. We also have the next exciting backing lined up. This should be launching next year and is the next step of our journey with carbon negative materials. It will contain an even higher concentration of carbon negative materials, meaning even smaller footprints for the products that it's on. There are so many amazing things to come, and personally, I can't wait for next year. But now let's have a look at some of the things that we're finding a little bit trickier. So looking back to our product life cycle, one of our biggest challenges is around the end of life of our products. As you remember, everything after our factory gate is harder for us to influence. And our product being thrown into landfill is a huge concern for us. We have created a solution. It's a program called Reentry. Reentry is a product take-back scheme that focuses on reuse. Our products are designed to last a long time. They've got a 15-year warranty. We expect them to last that long, if not a lot longer. But often they're taken up due to a brand change or a change in layout. And we work with several partners across the UK to ensure that as much of that product that we take back is reused as possible. Often it's reused for housing associations or charities, and it extends the life of the product. Where we can't reuse the product, we can sort of repurpose. We can send it to equestrian facilities. I'm not sure why horses like carpet tiles so much, but they do. And then if we can't do that, we can recycle, or at the very last option, we can recover, so send for waste to energy. But what it does ensure, this program, is that it doesn't go to landfill. So if we've got a solution, why is this still an issue for us? Well, construction contracts can involve a lot of decision makers, and often to get a client to choose our Reentry program and for it to stay as the preferred method for disposing of the flooring waste can be difficult. Unfortunately, it costs slightly more than just putting the old product in a skip, and a lot of the time money talks. There's also no legislation around waste carpet, meaning it's often the cheapest and easiest solution. But we are working on this. We're making the process as smooth as we can, and we're trying to interact with more and more of the decision makers. So while this is a huge challenge for us, and it will continue to be a huge challenge for us, I do feel that there's hope. And over the next few years, we can take back more and more product than we ever have before. Another challenge ahead for Interface is tackling carbon in our newer floor coverings. We now produce luxury vinyl tile, or LVT as it's also known, and we've recently acquired Nora rubber flooring. This presents a challenge, as we have to innovate with these materials like we have with carpet over the last 25 years. Like carpet, these products are currently covered by our carbon neutral floors programme. So they are carbon neutral, but we want to do more, and we want to reduce the footprint of the product before offsetting. We've started making progress with our LVT, already moving from 0 recycled content when we first launched the product to 39% recycled content this year. And we'll continue to work on that, driving down the carbon footprint and increasing the amount of recycled content. Working with these new materials is challenging, but I'm positive that we can reduce the footprints through innovations, just as we have with carpet. So you can see that Interface have come so far since we started working on the sustainability of the company, but we know there's so much more to do. And as companies and even societies are thinking about carbon, we need to establish what those quick wins are, but we also need to think about the longer term fixes. 0 is great, but in reality, we probably need to go beyond 0 to become restorative. So now is a time to think big and set big goals. Thank you.
Brilliant, Becky. Thank you so much, and very, very much on time. I didn't have to bang my gong. I've got a little gong, folks, that I'm going to bang if we need to. Now, there are actually quite a few interesting questions already in the chat box, and I wonder, I am going to go straight on to Gary, but there's a little one that came up right at the beginning, which is a very sort of technical clarification on a product, and I wonder if we'd just pick that one up very quickly. So this was from Celia right at the beginning, and she said, why don't you use wool in your carpets to help sheep farmers and produce better quality of carpet, therefore reducing raw materials? Is there a brief answer on that one?
Yeah, there is a brief answer. It's typically because of the type of markets we serve. Our products are used predominantly in commercial and education settings, and they need to be of extremely hard wearing, and wool doesn't give you the wear ratings that you would need in a commercial heavy footfall environment.
Excellent. All right, thank you. There's another interesting one about how you've defined terms and so on, but I'm going to keep that to the question bit, and we'll do Gary's, because in case anything similar-ish comes up after Gary's presentation. So thank you so much, Becky. And we'll go straight in now to Gary's. So Gary will be getting going at 2:30, and we'll go through till about 1:45. So just to very briefly introduce Gary, and he does wear two hats and speaks for the green energy company Ecotricity and does environmental management for them, but also he's wearing his Forest Green Rovers hat today. And you know, the introductory praise for Forest Green Rovers, my goodness, I mean, you know, this is our second company in the lineup today who really are internationally known for having pioneered into this space. And you know, for Forest Green Rovers, the plaudits have been coming thick and fast in the last few years. They're the first vegan football club, but also the first declared carbon neutral recognised club since 2018 against the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. I mean, these are serious achievements and very inspiring. We're so proud to have you on our doorstep in Gloucestershire, one of the other great green pioneering companies in Gloucestershire. And it's great working with you guys, Gary. So over to you, and I will disappear.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. Hopefully you can all hear me and nobody's missing out. So yeah, thanks for inviting me along. It's you know, great to be in such an esteemed company this morning, I guess. My name's Gary Thomas. I'm the sustainability lead for the Ecotricity Group. Now, folk often ask you, why have you got a football club amongst all of your companies? Yeah, it's a good question. You really have to sort of look, I guess, at the Ecotricity Group as a whole to see where it all fits together. And it's a bit like a jigsaw, really. So as a group of companies, we have four main pillars. There we go. So our four main pillars are energy, transport, food and nature. The first three of those, you know, together combined account for 80–90% of the national carbon emissions. So if you can address those issues, then basically you can crack the bigger problems that we've got as you know, globally. Really. So looking at energy, we've got the Ecotricity, our energy company. You know, we were the first green energy company, dedicated green energy company in the world. We've got quite a unique business model because we actually plough all of our profits back into creating new sources of renewable generation for our customers. But as well as that, we've also got a manufacturing unit that produces small-scale wind turbines that help other people on that journey towards sort of energy independence. The transport side of things, we've got covered by the electric highway, so our national network of EV charge points, which if you've ever been to a service station, you'll invariably pass one at some point. Then what else we got? We've got food. Food again, you know, we've got a recent addition to the Ecotricity family with the Devil's Kitchen, which is now producing vegan products for the mass catering market, schools, universities, hospitals, things like that. And nature we address with Eco Talk, which takes a similar model to the energy company in that we're using the profits to reclaim land for nature and rewild it to help pollinators. And yeah, Forest Green really is where all of these various sort of different elements come together. we've been involved with the club since 2010, and over that time it's changed quite significantly. And basically it's become our showcase to show, what can be done with sport. It's never traditionally been that worried about sustainability, and so we've used sort of the improvements and the initiatives that we've taken at Forest Green, basically to use it as a way of promoting what potentially others can do. Just like to sort of pass this quote by you. It's from Dale Vince, who's the founder of Ecotricity. I like this quote because it sort of sums up our approach. This chat this morning, I'm going to take you on an amble through the journey at FGR. But it's going to be very carbon focused, whereas actually, largely everything does come back to carbon, but sustainability, it stretches beyond, just numbers on a spreadsheet. You've got to consider a much wider breadth of impacts if you're going to look at creating a properly and truly sort of sustainable answer to the problems ahead. We've had an environmental management system in place at FGR now for about sort of 10 years. We're ISO 14001 accredited, not just at the football club, but across all of the various elements of the Ecotricity group. And having an EMS like this, it's helped us to focus. It's helped us to identify the things that are coming into our business, the raw materials and the products, what's happening to them in between, and then what's sent out at the other end, the waste, the dirty water, and products from the football club, merchandise from the shops, programs and things like that. By mapping everything in this manner, we can identify the areas that have got the greatest environmental impact, and then we can look at what can be done to reduce those levels. So it's this classic sort of plan, do, check, act process. So the planning is where it starts, and that's, it's the first part of the process. It's where you look at things, and we've worked out what the ins are and what the outs are and what the middle bits are and what we're doing there. And we've identified the problem areas, because, you cannot address any problems that you've got until you actually know where those issues lie. Then we get on to the doing part, and this is where we implement the action plans to reduce those issues that we've already identified. And this can be done by looking at the issues and deciding, is it possible for us to avoid them, or do we need to maybe reduce those problems? Or, if we have to live with them, can we replace them with something else? So the avoidance side of things at FGR, we avoid single-use plastics for our cleaning materials, because we actually manufacture an ozone fortified cleaning disinfectant on site from tap water and electricity. And that's great because, it provides us with a multi-surface disinfectant, especially in your current climes. We've got big demand for that sort of thing. So ensuring that you've got constant supply chain, for us, it's been brilliant. As well as reducing those sort of delivery emissions that are also associated with bringing stuff in from outside. We avoid grid electricity. We've got solar panels on the roof of one of our stands, and they provide us with 20% of the annual electricity requirements at FGR. So, that's a significant combination from renewable energy. And other things, we avoid them. We turn fridges off. The hospitality fridges are only on during match days, just prior to the game starting, and then we turn them off afterwards. There's no point keeping drinks cool for 2 weeks waiting for the next game to come along. If you can't avoid stuff, maybe we can reduce them. So we've reduced our mains water consumption by recycling the pitch water. So rain falls onto the pitch, it gets captured, it gets pumped into a tank, and then it's pumped back onto the pitch again, in place of using mains water. Our vehicle washdown area is, again, it's self-circulating, so we're not pumping mains water into the drainage system. It's actually self-circulating the little microbes that help break down the contaminants within the wash water, so that we can keep reusing the same water again and again. And what else have we done? We've reduced our supply chain emissions. When you think about our hospitality side of things, increasing the amount of local, vegetable-based foodstuffs, we've reduced those emissions in the supply chain. Then we get to replacing stuff. So, you know, we switched diesel powered grounds maintenance equipment to electric. So we've got a little remote control robot that powers itself around the pitch, cutting the grass all the time. And when it runs out of battery, it chugs back, it plugs itself into our solar panels, and it charges up again. We've removed all meat and dairy in our catering because, you know, almost a fifth of global carbon emissions come from livestock farming. So, you know, we were the first vegan football club in the world. It's been a gradual process. We first took red meat off of the menu at FGR back in 2010. It wasn't until 2015 that we finally removed dairy milk and replaced it with oat-based milk instead. So, you know, it's been a slow transition, and, you know, we got a lot of flack for it in the early days, but also on the flip side of it, we got a lot of coverage. It helped us to bring out that debate. It's the sort of thing we wanted people to talk about and realise actually that, you know, there are impacts in all of these decisions that we make. And, you know, it's an opportunity for us to show folk that, you know, vegan food is not all beige and boring, and it can have flavours and it can have textures just like every other food in the world. And, you know, it's been great, and it's encouraged people to come and visit us purely for the food, if, you know, not for the football. So we've gone through that process, we've done the planning, and we've done the doing. Then it comes to the checking. So we're always continuously monitoring and measuring, because, you know, it's important to ensure that all of those plans that we've just put in place are actually doing what we're wanting them to do. And then it comes to acting, because at the end of it, you've got to finally modify those solutions, change anything that needs, you know, modifying, so that, you know, you can improve things, because life is it's a continual improvement process. So we've gone back, we've acted on things, and it's at this point only that you then look to compensate. So the final part of the process for us is compensating for any residual emissions that are left over. In FGR, we do this as part of our commitment under the UN Climate Neutral Now programme. And we use UN certified emissions reductions for those. And, you know, the UN have recognised us as the first carbon neutral football club in the world. And credits do have a place in the process, as Alex mentioned earlier, but they do come in at the end once you've looked at all of that, you know, avoiding, reducing, replacing stuff. It's not something that you should reel out at the first instance once you've got an idea of what your carbon footprint is. You know, it literally is, it comes at the end. It is the thing that carries off the residual emissions. You know, one of the key areas of any business to look at is energy, and it'll always be part of that movement towards being zero carbon. FGR, like I said earlier, around sort of 20% of our energy comes from the solar panels that we've got on the stadium. We get the rest of the electric from Ecotricity, surprisingly enough. Even though we're effectively supplying ourselves, it's still in our interest to reduce consumption as much as possible, because the more green energy that we leave in the grid, the more other people can use it. You know, and it's not just an environmental perspective that it's good. You know, financially for us, it's good to use less energy as possible, because, you know, typically half of an energy bill, it doesn't go to Ecotricity, it covers things like network costs, and, you know, 20% is slapped on for VAT. So, you know, all of those things work for us to try and cut back as much as possible, you know, on our energy consumption, even though it does come from renewable sources. Now, at FGR, we don't have an all singing, all dancing building management system, but what we have got is smart metering. And, you know, most companies and most businesses now have smart meters. And these have really opened up things to allow us better insight into our consumption data. What we've got here is an example of a monthly plot for Forest Green, our electric usage from Stark, which is the energy management system that we've got from Ecotricity. It allows us to see smart meter data and little snapshots at half-hourly intervals. When you're starting out on this journey, you know, if you want to find out what your energy consumption is like, you go and talk to your energy provider. They should be able to provide you with something like this, you know, a similar platform where you can analyze your data on this half-hourly basis. And, you know, if not, come and join up and switch to Ecotricity. You know, we'll welcome you. It's great, this sort of system, because you can check your consumption, you can flag anomalies. You know, you can look at your gas, your heating, your HVAC systems. You start to question yourself, you know, why is the heating system coming on 2 hours before, you know, the first person enters the building in the morning? Why is it on until, you know, after the last person leaves? If you can cut down your energy consumption by, you know, just 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes at the end of the day, that's an hour a day, 5 hours over the course of a week. Multiply that up by the number of hours your heating system's on throughout the year. You know, you've got significant environmental and financial savings. Likewise, you know, you need to check things like thermostats and, you know, are they on the correct level? Are there areas of, you know, your buildings that you can cut down the temperatures on? Do you need everything at the same degree of heat? So these systems are great. You know, home games for us are played on Saturdays in on Tuesdays, and you can see from this chart exactly when we've had games. The days prior to those, we often have setups, more cooking's done and things like that. So you get spikes in energy, and you can see all of that. But you can also, you know, like I say, it does help you to identify anomalies. And, you know, this sort of data and the granularity that you now get, you know, it's helped us to review the way we use the building. It's helped us to manage things a lot better, to use the space that we've got. You know, we're quite lucky in that, you know, outside of a match day, we've only got a small number of staff. So it's actually fairly easy for us to engage with people and get the message across. It's quite a simple and nice, easy task. Carbon footprint. So this is the carbon footprint for FGR. This chart shows the related emissions that are calculated. This is done on a location-based methodology. So what we're doing here is we're taking grid average figures for electric and for gas. So everyone, you know, counts their emissions the same, no matter who the supplier is. Now, this really helps us to show, you know, what's been going on over the last few years. So we've had an increase in emissions as we got promoted in the league. We got more people coming along, so obviously there are more demands on services. But what we've seen in the last few years is quite a change around, in that we've got a drop-off, even though the crowds are still quite considerable. But what we've been doing is reducing our energy consumption on site as we modify the way that we use the building, you know, around us, and ensure that we optimize all of our systems, you know, as best as possible. So, oh, Alex has just given me dings. So I'll go to this one quickly. This is the carbon footprint. If you take out the renewable elements, so our electric and gas, which is compensated by credits, so it's carbon neutral, you find that this is the picture that we're left with, which is very different, but it also goes to help to show you on a reporting basis how renewable energy tariffs and using things like solar can help you move on that journey towards being sort of, you know, the carbon neutral targets that we're looking for. Plans at the moment. So if we're looking at, you know, what we've got left on our carbon footprint, travel is a big one that's left over once you take away the things that are related to energy. So we're going to be looking at fan away travel this year, and also the impact of fans attending home games. But in the future, we've got bigger plans. We're developing a new stadium down by the motorway, which is going to be called Eco Park. It's going to be made of wood. It's really, you know, we've already done the thing where we look at what we can do from a retrospective point of view on the site. This is going to be what you can do when you start off with a complete clean sheet and what we can implement. Hopefully, you know, it'll give us a chance to influence the game's sporting agenda a lot further. So what are the main bits of advice that I can give to you that we've learned over the years? I think the main thing is keep it simple at the start of the journey, is don't rush in and trying to measure everything at once, because you'll get awfully confused. Just keep it nice and simple. Once you've got confidence in your data, roll with that and, you know, carry on. Buy-in from staff at all levels, not just, you know, with a working group of staff on the coalface and one manager at the top. You need all of the interim managers to be on board and understand what you're doing, because they're the ones that are going to be providing the resources. When it comes to messaging, think about who your audience is. Some people are more financial led, so, you know, don't go at them with carbon information and environmental benefits. Talk to them about finance, about what you can save by cutting energy consumption. If you get rid of one bin lift a week, you know, how much is that going to save you over the course of a year? And don't be afraid to stick with what you do. you know, with those decisions. If we'd, you know, turned around after a week and put red meat back on the menu at FGR, we would have missed out on so much, because there are lots of opportunities now that have come out of this. The vegan food business, you know, the amount of media coverage, 5 billion people saw us, you know, last year in the media. We're even at the point now of opening a consultancy to help other people move down this road to become more sustainable. You know, all of those things would have been a very different picture if we'd, you know, turned around after a couple of weeks and gone, yeah, you can have your burgers back. There we go, Alex. Is that all right?
Thanks, Gary. You see, I've got my little singing bowls. My new invention, everybody, of how to try and not interrupt people in an overt way in a webinar. Thanks very much, Gary. And it's really interesting actually hearing about you've given us a lot of information there about some of the really good things that you're doing. And also quite interesting to hear that travel is a headache, which of course it is for us very much as well, in terms of mapping the wider indirect impacts. Now, we have got a little bit of time for Q&A on these first two presentations, and actually quite a lot of interesting questions coming up. I'm going to go, I may not catch quite yet all the ones that have just come in the last couple of minutes, so I'm going to go back to the top, but we'll pick those up in the next Q&A chat if we don't manage to do it now. And I might start you 5 minutes later, depending on how many questions we go through just now. Here's a quick one, Becky, for you. There was one right back at the beginning who asked, why did you talk about carbon negative, not carbon positive? And what are carbon negative materials for you?
So really early on, when we produced the carbon negative concept tile, we called it our proof positive tile. So I think in terms of the language and the terminology, it's taken us a little while to settle, but I think that generally the industry is settling that if something is carbon negative, it removes more carbon from the atmosphere by existing than if it didn't exist. So when you're talking about carbon footprint, that is a positive figure, and therefore if it is a carbon negative product, it has a negative figure. So even though negative itself is a bad word, I think it is the correct terminology. And a carbon negative material is just that. It's one that removes more carbon from the atmosphere by existing. So for example, you can use plant-based materials. So a plant will sequester carbon from the atmosphere as it grows. If we can then take parts of that plant, such as bioresins and bio-oils, and put that into our product with low impact manufacturing, it's carbon negative materials going into the product. So we're effectively storing that carbon that has been sequestered into our products and locking it into the products.
Thank you. That's really helpful, because it's carbon negative, carbon positive as well. We think it's slightly used differently in different countries still. It's an emerging set of terms that hasn't fully settled yet. So it's really interesting hearing the lowdown from the experts. Very helpful. Thank you. I'm going to go on to a question that came in from Kath. How lovely to see you, Kath, who's a brilliant woman in our region leading the Gloucestershire Green Business Circle. She's asked a really interesting question around measuring indirect emissions, and she asked it to Becky, but Gary might like to also make a little comment about how they view this. So Kath said, how do you work with the uncertainties in understanding the quantitative measurements of life cycle analysis so that you can do the right size of offsetting to get the products carbon neutral? And where are the biggest uncertainties?
Okay, for us, obviously it's product life cycle that we're looking at for this particular thing. And part of it is just on industry accepted calculations, and part of it is sort of best case scenario guesswork. It's not perfect. It never will be perfect, because you have one person or one company that might use your product for 2 years, another company will use it for 20 years. And obviously that has a huge impact on those calculations post factory gate. So yeah, so some are, we do like, we have EPDs for our product, which looks at life cycle impact. So there are some sort of industry standards for certain elements. But yeah, it's definitely not perfect, but it's the best we can do at the moment until we can get better control over those later stages. If we get to a point where we're taking all of our product back, then we'll know the exact carbon footprint of that, because all the product that we take there, we understand the carbon impact of that because we're dealing with it.
That's really useful. Yeah, thank you. Gary, is this...
Sorry, was there that question that I needed to answer, or was that all of it?
I think that's it. That's that one. I wondered if you wanted to make any comment about this measuring and life cycle, Gary.
Yeah, so from the life cycle perspective, because we are a stadium and there's not a huge amount of materials that actually come on site. We have, I guess, from some aspects we're a bit bound by what we can choose from. So things like the pitch is organic, so we automatically have a limited number of materials that we can use on the pitch for that. So I guess with us the large thing comes through procurement guidance to ensure that everybody's on board and they know that actually there's a thought process that you go through when you're looking at stuff, that certain things that we can't consider because especially with the pitch, that we can either only have organic materials. With the catering side of things, it's got to be vegan, so we can't have anything out potential animal or dairy products. So there are guidance notes that will reduce the number of things that we can look at. Our main impacts sit with energy consumption in here. Like I said earlier, it's really with the transport now where our big efforts need to be placed to, and it's the same for sport in general. It's always the same thing. It's always the bit that any sporting arena comes back to. In every club that I've ever talked to has always said, what can you do about transport? Because especially with us, we're in a stadium that was built many years ago for a non-league club. We're at the top of a hill surrounded by housing estate. There's a one-track road coming in one side, not much better coming in through the other direction. So transport routes in and out are difficult anyway, so we've got to try and minimize the amount of people in cars, purely just to ease on the congestion aspect. Those are our main considerations at the moment.
How do you measure it at the moment? Do you have a particular way of trying to understand the travel pattern of fans?
Well, it's our aim this year to go back, once we've actually got people back at the ground, is to start looking at it and start analysing it more. We did some research as part of the work for the planning process for the new stadium, but we just need to go back and sort of clarify what the situation is, at the current stadium. So then at least, we can look at, potential avenues of how we can improve it, or if we can't, cut down, then to look to offset that element of fan travel as well.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to go to a question that again came in while Becky was talking, but it might be quite an interesting one for both of you to try and address. So this came in from Audrey. Great to see you, Audrey. And it's a question about influencing your sector. So Audrey asked, what is Interface doing, but let's also apply it to the sporting context, with the rest of the industry to help wean peers off oil-based materials?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting question, and it's one that's, I guess, quite controversial with some people within Interface, because ultimately our sustainability story is one of our USPs. Like, it's why people come to us. So there are some that don't necessarily want our competitors to follow suit, but I think that if you look at the industry now and how our competitors are having to talk about sustainability, I think we've definitely pushed it along. Sort of back in the early 90s, when we set our original mission around sustainability, there was one of the sort of target areas was getting our sort of suppliers to zero as well. So not only did we sort of want to look at what we did within our factories, we wanted to try and push our suppliers to change the way they worked. So we approached all of our suppliers and said, look, this is what we're trying to do. Who wants to come along with us? Like, basically, if you make the changes to your business, you will get a higher percentage of business from us. And that led to a company called Aquafil developing a product which was 100% recycled yarn, which we at Interface sort of used to start with. But that product is now available for all of our competitors to use. So it's not about taking innovations and keeping them to ourselves forever. It's about, yes, we'll push, we'll make advances, but then ultimately the advances we make will benefit everybody else. So I think that by us challenging our supply chain to do things differently, that then benefits the industry as a whole and kind of forces people to move in a certain direction. And some of our competitors have, you know, gladly gone in that direction. Others have just kind of had to do it because we've been helping, you know, architects, designers and end user clients ask the right questions of their manufacturers. So yeah, it's been a process. There's still a long way to go, but I think that it is important to drive an entire industry. And I think what would be really interesting to see is with us going into 2 new markets with the sort of hard flooring options that we've got now, is it'll be interesting to see if competitors within those fields also make the same changes that our carpet competitors have had to do over the years. And hopefully they will. Hopefully there'll be a lot more recycled content. There'll be a lot more sort of smaller carbon footprints along the way, but there's definitely some work with innovation to be done first.
Thank you, Becky. That's very interesting. And also I really feel for the comment that you made, which is so spot on, about there's the competitive tension in that area of how do you influence your industry. We also have had that as a younger, newer university pushing sustainability into education, and watching larger and older established institutions with slightly deeper pockets and larger teams picking it up and running with it and thinking, oh, hang on. It's a really interesting space. But of course, you know, when you want to genuinely move the whole agenda forward, you do have to walk that line. So really interesting. Gary, I wondered if you wanted to comment, you know, whether on the vegan agenda in particular or some other aspect about how you're trying to influence the peers in the sector.
Where do you start? You know, with FGR, the interest externally, and you know, a lot of it was initially kicked off by, you know, losing that red meat from the menu, and you know, the media focus that brought to us. Yeah, there's not a match day that goes by where we haven't got, you know, a film crew, you know, 2, 3 film crews, radio journalists, you know, print journalists that are at the site wanting to look at the story for FGR. We're, you know, we're a 2nd division club, and we're the smallest club in the league, and yet, you know, we've got this voice that goes far beyond. You know, it's an international reach. We get people who go out of their way to come and visit us just to see what we're doing. You know, when you've got the UN coming to you and saying, hey, we've got this new initiative, we really want you in at the start of it, you suddenly think, yeah, actually, okay, we are pulling our weight here and actually having influence outside. Because, you know, like I said, you know, earlier on, you know, sport, it's never been one of those areas that's, you know, particularly key to sustainability, but people are waking up to that now. We get constant streams of, you know, it's not just football clubs anymore. We get, you know, golf clubs, tennis, cricket. Yeah, anybody with a pitch who wants to know about organic, you know, horticulture and how to manage their sites, you know, with an environmental context, they all want to talk to us and find out what we've been doing. So yeah, you know, it's one of those things that sometimes you sat there in a meeting, you think, is this really happening? Because, you know, we're just a little club from Nailsworth, but yeah, it is happening, and people are interested and they want to learn from us. You know, we're open to sharing that experience. You know, the number of people that end up coming along, you know, just so that they can have a tour of the site, see all of the various aspects. Like I say, you know, it's taking all of those things like the energy, the transport, the food and the nature, and how they merge into one site. You know, the opportunities ahead of us as well with the Eco Park Stadium. You know, it's going to be, you know, fantastic in the future. Yeah, it's definitely we have been pulling our weight, I think, on the talking and influencing people.
Yes, and not to underestimate how a small club in Nailsworth can influence, because the influence of the sports sector actually has been giant in the bigger picture of social change. If you think about the influence on racism, for instance, and the whole programs of let's kick racism out of football, or back to cricket and apartheid South Africa, some of those campaigns that have involved sporting movement directly to influence have been magnificent in their impact.
And it's working with groups like the Football League that we can work with them to actually promote sustainability and help them focus their agenda. So, yeah, you know, there are ways that we can influence ourselves vocally with the fans in, you know, other clubs. And also, you know, we've got those inputs into things like the UN programs in the EFL that we can also help out on those levels.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to try and there were quite a few little questions that were coming in for Gary. So I'm going to see if I can just note up to Anne. I'll probably bring you on in a couple of minutes, Anne, but we've got plenty of time in this seminar. So I'm going to just see if we can pick up some very rapid fire answers for Gary about particular things. Actually, there's one. Let's see if I can pick this one actually, first of all, for Becky, from David Trevelyan. Does your product have a BIM 6 file to support construction to assess life cycle performance?
So we have links to BIM that you can use in BIM, but for the actual carbon calculations, we have EPDs, which are environmental product declarations, and they show you the carbon footprint. We also just have the carbon footprint on the technical spec of the website, so it's super easy to find, because unless you are used to reading EPDs, they are not the easiest documents to look at. But those can be input into, there's several carbon calculators for the built environment as well. One that we've been involved with developing in the States, which is, it's live in Europe now, we're just kind of waiting for people to populate it with their EPDs, is a tool called EC3. And that essentially you can export your model from Revit or the platform that you're using into EC3, and it will tell you the embodied carbon on that project.
That's really helpful, actually, and there's quite a few people potentially would find that a useful answer to know. Okay, over to you, Gary. Here's some of the little quickies for FGR. The first one was, can we assume you will not use gas flares at match start?
Gas flares? Don't use gas flares. We have flags.
They have flags.
Yes.
Great answer. Right. What product do you use for serving food on match days? There's a big shift to disposables, partly with COVID, but many are industrial compost items which don't appear to be collected in Gloucestershire. Do you have any recommendations?
This is something that we have two elements of hospitality. There's the serving side of it internally, where we still use, you know, china plates in washable materials, but the elements for the match side, you know, pitch side catering, we had a composting avenue all sorted for that, where we were using switched to compostable trays, clamshells, even compostable cutlery, and we were moving down the avenue. But the digestion plant that we initially had key to take that has now decided that they're not going to be accepting compostable containers. So we need to go back and review it now, whether or not we can find another facility that's within a practical distance to make it, you know, still environmentally achievable, is another question. So yeah, it's one of those things that we thought we had solved, but is back on the agenda now. So have I got any suggestions for a local facility? Not at the moment, but yeah, if anybody does know of one, I'll be, yeah, it'd be very good to hear, because yeah, it is one of those issues. Now, whether or not at the new stadium, you know, there's the potential for us to put in a small scale AD plant that we could use. But yeah, that's in the future. But for practical solutions at the moment, I'm open to suggestions.
That's cool. Quick one, do you have battery storage on your sites?
We don't at FGR, no. Battery storage is something that's really only now becoming you know, financially viable. So it's all of the energy that we actually produce on the solar panels at FGR, it's basically used on site, because even on, on non-match days, we've still got offices, we've still got servers that are operating, refrigeration for all of the food stuff, which, it's enough to actually eat up all of the energy that we produce. So it's not like we're bleeding stuff back into the grid.
Thank you. Okay, now I think I'm going to draw a line there. There is a really interesting questions being asked about finance in all of this, and actually I privately had that one, that thank you Charlie, and I'll keep that one when we've got all four of them answering at the end, because I think everybody's got their own interesting story to tell about trying to walk the line with financial performance, so we'll keep that one. And I see there's an interesting travel thing coming out again, we maybe keep that one. We've talked a little bit now already about the wider scope 3 indirect impacts, which include the things like the travel and the supply chain. So I think we'll just hold those for now. What I'm going to do now is say thank you very, very much, and cheerio for a moment until the final shindig, to Becky and Gary. That's been absolutely brilliant, and some really interesting under the bonnet technical things that you've shared with us. Thank you so much. You're very welcome to switch your faces off for a moment. And Anne, if you would like to get ready, we're just coming on at just after 5 past, Anne, so we'll sort of give you through to the, at least 20 past or a smidge afterwards. Anne, just to introduce Anne, I mean, obviously she is here to speak on behalf of the cathedral, and the first of this next little section of 2, which is organisations, ourselves and yourselves, who, we may not have actually been internationally recognised for our carbon reductions quite yet at the UN level, etc. But we are earnestly progressing within our own sectors and really pushing the envelope within our own sectors. And what you guys have been doing within the context of the wider Church of England is just absolutely remarkable. And, a flagship thing being to have put up a solar array that was to generate about a quarter of your power on the roof of the first ever ancient cathedral worldwide to have done this. And I gather the oldest building worldwide to have put a solar array up. And that's just on the practical side, and one of so many things that are going on at the cathedral, who we are really proud to partner with on sustainability locally. So thank you, Anne, and over to you.
Thanks, Alex. Really good to hear those 2 presentations and some of the discussion afterwards, because some of it felt really familiar, and some of it felt very, very different to particularly where we are on the journey, and I think that will come out in the presentation quite early on. But I'm talking really about net zero in the context of an organisation which has been around for centuries. The Church of England, 500 odd years we've been around, and Gloucester Cathedral, we've been living and working and worshipping in that same space, that same piece of land for a millennia. And as an organisation, our business is about influence. We also mean a lot of different things to a lot of different audiences, but we are absolutely not exempt from real world challenges, be they the financial one you kind of alluded to earlier, or the kind of, the climate emergency that we're all in. And despite all of that long history and track record of sustainability and all the things that you might associate with an ancient organisation, the Church of England just has committed to get to net zero by 2030. So that's the context in which we're operating. And I just need to move forward on my screen. The first one with tech problems. So, our net zero goals. 2020 for all of us has brought lots of new words, COVID, coronavirus, social distancing. In February 2020, the phrase net zero came into view in the Church of England. Prior to that, to give you some sense of what we thought we were doing and how long we thought we had to do it in, we talked about shrinking the footprint. We talked about reducing our carbon footprint by 80% by 2050. And then in February 2020 at Synod, which is, I guess it's the kind of church parliament or the shareholder annual general meeting, see it how you will, actually some really passionate individuals said 2050 is too long. We need to be at net zero by 2030. And Synod committed then to work out what that means and how we get there. And so through the depths of the pandemic, there has been an awful lot of work to define what we mean. What are our net zero goals? How are we going to get to them? So it's a new phrase. The recommendations have been developed. They're going to be considered by Synod next month. And that's really, really technical. But the reason I've kind of referenced this fifth mark of Christian mission is partly because of the kind of organisation we are. We, in some ways, seem much bigger than we actually are. We have churches everywhere, but lots of churches and organisations are run by volunteers, just a handful of people for each church. So because of who we are and what is important to us, it's really important for us to think in terms of our values and not just the tech stuff. And that fifth mark of Christian mission is basically that we strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. And if we can start to talk in those terms, it helps to get buy-in across the piece, because everyone is going to have a role in getting to net zero. The broad church, I mean that quite literally. There is a major cathedral on that slide in front of you. There are parish churches everywhere. There are major churches. There's clergy housing. There's other property that's owned, land, schools, Church of England schools. So physically, it really is a broad church. But also that question about what are we responsible for in terms of the carbon footprint. And Becky described it in terms of leading up to the factory gates and leaving. And we're sort of struggling with that now. So this is where we have arrived in terms of the recommendations that go to Synod for net zero. By 2030, we will be responsible for getting to net zero, the energy use of our buildings, and in work-related travel. They're quite major, but there's a lot of stuff that falls into the list of happening after 2030 or being completely out of scope, something that we are suggesting isn't our responsibility. So after 2030, major construction projects, land management, procurement, you can read them for yourselves. The interesting thing for, I think, a number of us in the Church of England is the technical language that comes with these, upstream and downstream. This is all new terminology for us, and we are not experts. But at the bottom, you can see that out of scope is travel to and from work, travel to churches, to schools, the wider emissions of clergy and family and our worshippers, and schools which we are outside of meaningful control. And the consultation's been going on about this for some time. Like I say, the recommendation now goes to Synod next year. But for us, in the cathedral in particular, it's really leaving travel outside of scope completely, never mind after 2030, is really problematic. We are a place of worship, tourist destination, and we welcome over 400,000 people a year. And we feel it is important for people to come to the cathedral. We encourage that. Yes, those carbon footprints might belong to individuals and families and groups, but we are encouraging people to come to the cathedral. And what you can see in those little kind of tables and charts is some carbon footprinting that we did for our large construction projects, transformation project, Project Pilgrim Phase 1, 5 years ago now, when we looked at where our carbon emissions were coming from. And you can see that before the project, blue was our kind of utilities, red is our transport. And then we thought, we'll be attracting more visitors after, so yes, our utilities might go down thanks to our solar panels, but our transport is forecast to go up. It's a huge part of the carbon emissions at the cathedral, and we don't want to ignore it because we are encouraging people to visit. Now, for other bits of the Church of England, that's really not such a problem, and some of the kind of assessments that we've got so far have shown that secondary schools are a particular issue, major churches are a particular issue, and areas to focus on because those emissions can be reduced relatively straightforwardly. Parish churches, much less so. So even though Synod is considering these elements being in net zero next month for the cathedral, we need to focus on one more. That goes back then to how do we do that? We do have this longer track record. It goes back to this, kind of principles. Do we take a very technical approach to net zero, or do we see it in terms of who we are as an organisation? We have had over 1,000 years of worship on the cathedral site. We have, and you can see it on the right-hand side of the screen, where the Abbey of St. Peter, a pattern of life connected to the community and to the land. And that pattern of life is sometimes hard to see in the 21st century, although COVID weirdly made it easier. But our history allows us to showcase it and to show those connections and the interdependencies and the fragility. I mentioned we've been around for 500 years, and the Church of England, we haven't, we're not still here because we haven't changed. We have obviously changed and adapted as we have gone along. But that does not mean that we are early adopters. It doesn't mean we're fleet of foot, but it does mean that we recognise that we have to do things differently, albeit remaining true to our core purpose. And then the buildings that, not just the cathedral, but the buildings that the Church of England owns are in every community. That sort of visibility, they are, across the land. And they have been here for longer than any of us. The Church of England owns getting on for half of all Grade 1 listed buildings. So when we come to some of the issues that we have, I've already flagged up transport as a key one because of our visitors. The nature of heritage buildings is an issue for us, but it's not one that we can ignore. So we could see this in a technical way, we could see it in focusing on buildings, but actually we want to maintain a meaningful presence. We want our net zero work to be part of wider sustainability. So yes, the cathedral is all of those things at the top. It's a Christian place of worship, anchor tenant. We are a major tourist destination. We do contribute to the economic health of the city and county. We are custodians of the building and heritage. But as a 21st century cathedral with sustainability at our heart, in some ways, the UN sustainability goals are a really good way to talk about what we do. We are responding to those challenges. We are building on the achievements of our previous work. And that's where a lot of our partner work comes in. We're really fortunate that people who know much more than we do about all kinds of issues and who are much more skilled and experienced at working in those fields will work with us. And so today's seminar is a great example of the University of Gloucestershire, #1 sustainability university, being able to work with us and to take us on a journey. We can't do everything, we know that, so we've focused our own thinking on 4 social responsibility goals. The environment is one of those. Okay, what has worked so far for us? I've talked about getting the vision right. That's so important because the technical language is beyond some people, because people's ability to commit is quite difficult. But if we talk about this 5th mark Christian mission, if we talk about being in tune with heaven, in touch with daily life, if we see that big picture, it's easy to be going in the right direction. But we also, taking stock has been really helpful. So we haven't done an assessment of our visitor, our demographics for 5 years. We need to do another one. Will that tell us something different? about where our visitors are coming from, particularly given that our visitor numbers have been so impacted by COVID. We've also sought support, and we've sought it from a number of different areas and organisations that resonate with us. So I mentioned kind of our partners and the support and advice that we get. University of Gloucestershire is one. We have found ISO 14001 isn't for us, but there are two accreditation schemes that work. One is the Eco Church scheme. We've achieved bronze in that. One is Green Tourism Awards. We're at silver status in those. Both of those have this great raft of checklist areas to focus on, things that we might not have considered, things that we need to improve in order to move to gold status in both of them, which is in the business plan for this year. So finding those right accreditations has been important. The solar panels that you can see, which we think are an incredibly beautiful PV array, obviously the level of technical support, specialist technical support we had to make that work was significant. But looking down to that bullet point about positive feedback, one of the really great things that has happened from the solar panels, very much in the kind of Forest Green model, is that we have attracted all kinds of attention. You know, we've had Al Gore's Climate Reality Project filming us, we've received awards, but we also, and this is where the influence feels very direct, because of the permissions and technical issues, the fact that Historic England treat this as a best practice case study, the fact that they put it in their technical advice, means that when other buildings and organisations want to put solar PV or other initiatives on their buildings, on heritage buildings, there is a precedent and there is something in the technical advice that says this is how you can do it. And every month I get at least 2, usually more, inquiries from other organisations who are interested in what we've done, and we share all of our information with them. But that positive feedback is very, very, very important. The other thing, just in the sort of bottom right-hand corner, is the Church of England's carbon footprint tool. So I said that there's lots of kind of volunteers in the Church of England, obviously huge numbers of clergy, but centrally, there is some really good support and specialist advice coming. That's in the form of YouTube tutorials, it's in the form of a new carbon footprinting tool, so we can see and benchmark and then work out which are our, you know, greatest areas of carbon emissions and how do we reduce those. And then the other thing that's worked for us is opening our doors, being really honest about the fact that this is a journey and we are only at the very start of it, and we want to engage people and share what we're doing, but we also learn from that, and we find, you know, we try to find ways that work across the piece. So one of the things that we've got is the installation of Gaia. I won't bore you with it, but we do have you know, a very limited number of people that can get into the cathedral to see Gaia this time. So we have filmed, thanks to our sponsors, Ecclesiastical, a 360-degree virtual reality film to share what we're doing. And one of the things that will come out of COVID for us is an increased focus on digital, how we use that. So Christmas at home is going to sort of be quite a different thing than Christmas at the cathedral this year. Just going to play a tiny bit of this. If you do have 5 minutes, in fact 30 minutes, over the next couple of days, this will be available for people to see. And there's a really interesting introduction by the artist Luke Jerram talking about what he was trying to achieve. And you'll find out more on the website about all of the different organisations that are part of Gaia. So yeah, please take your time to go and find that one. Okay, hardest bit of the challenge. Thanks, Alex. Heritage buildings, they are difficult in and of themselves because of the size, scale, materials, and because there are so many people to tell you what you cannot do as opposed to what you can do. There's a logo at the bottom, Fit for the Future. It's a terrific member organisation, really spearheaded by the National Trust, but also the National Lottery Heritage Fund. We find a lot of comfort and support in that organisation, but working with buildings that are this old is not easy. Now, since that we are not alone in that, and we take that challenge on the chin, so that we can see what we can do, how we can make buildings more sustainable. Our visitors, like I say, 400,000 plus visitors every year. It's a huge deal. And balancing the triple bottom line, we, like every other organisation, have been badly hit by COVID. We are not an organisation that manufactures and sells things, carpet or otherwise. So we're really reliant on the income, the donations that come from our visitors, as well as the income that come from our heritage property. Balancing that with our carbon net zero commitments is going to be tricky. Finding the time to do it is also tricky, particularly when we have realised this year, like so many other people, that we do not have as long as we thought to work through these issues.
And thank you, that's terrific. And really interesting as well to hear you talking about the visitor experience and about historic building stock, which we also have a little bit of that at the university, which is a bit of a thing. I can see that there are some more interesting questions to be answered. I'm going to keep them all for the final sort of bit of wrap-up chat, including Pete Barrett. Hello there, and thank you. I agree with you. We'll ask our next two speakers to talk about influencing their sectors as well. I think we'll come back to that question. But without further ado, hello, John, who's popped his head up. Thank you, Anne, who's popped away. And this one doesn't really need a lot of introduction. Nobody wants to hear me saying how inordinately pleased we were to become the first most sustainable university in the UK last year. There are a few indexes and rankings of universities for sustainability out there, but the one that we came top of, we're the most proud of it because, number one, it's actually devised by students. They're our customers, as it were, as well as our main object in terms of our big impact. The league table that they organised and the criteria they set really, really matters to us. And also it ranks every single university, whether they like it or not. So that's our bit of being pleased. But my goodness, we've got multiple sites, we've got heritage stock, new stuff, we've got the impact of coronavirus, all number of carbon related headaches that my good colleague John, who joined us this year in lockdown, is navigating on the carbon planning for us. So over to you, John, and 15 minutes and I'll give you a bong if you need it.
Okay, morning everyone. So just let me get ready to share my screen, which now for some reason, even though I practiced it, isn't working. Let's just try again on that. I'll do it this way. Let me just minimize something and then we'll start. Let's find that. Aha, it's now working properly. That's good. Okay, so it'll get up on the screen in a second. And yeah, so thanks, Alex, for that. Yes, as Alex said, I'm kind of in a lucky place and unlucky in that some of the things I was going to talk about other people have already, and also some of the themes are very, very common. So one of the things to perhaps note as we kind of start this is, unlike Interface and in ways similar to the Cathedral and FGR, we're in an odd place in that our kind of raw materials and our supplier in a way is our students starting off their education process, and they're also our customer at the same time. So hopefully we're going to produce well-educated people who can go out there and influence in terms of sustainability and carbon management the rest of the world, really. So we've kind of got a double opportunity, I suppose. And then within this quick sort of briefing, I was going to talk a bit about where we're aiming to go, what we've done so far, and how we hope to make the next steps, and maybe using some of the real examples we've had. So we started our journey quite some time ago, really. So we, as a sector, we've had targets set on our 2004 emissions. Everyone's now changing to sort of 2019-20 emissions. And we're now in the midst of writing our plan for the next 10 years. looking to reduce our carbon emissions as far as possible, and then starting to look seriously at how we would do net zero. And this chart there shows you some of the changes we need to make. We've got some ambitious targets around how we reduce our emissions for electricity and gas. But then really the real one that I'm going to talk a bit more about today is kind of the scope 3 aspects, including the travel of our students and staff to and from university. And that is truly a big impact for us. So that little chart there shows you the kind of visual difference, but also I've tried to give people an idea of what carbon offsetting could actually cost, because that's an important part of the equation, certainly for a business or an organisation such as ourselves, where our income is linked to our student numbers. It's not as if we can sell more and have our carbon offsetting costs incorporated into those costs we pass on to our customer. We've got to find a way of absorbing those, and they need to be as small as possible. It's very hard to say what those costs will be in the future, because 10 years from now, who knows what will happen. COVID-19 has certainly taught us something in that regard. But potentially it could cost us anything between £300,000 to £750,000, which would be a significant cost for the organisation. So we have to plan accordingly, but that's part of the justification, really, when I think Gary was talking about, kind of finding the right language to different people. A lot of the people in this audience will be almost self-selecting in their interest in the environment, but other people, their real driver is cost, or how it's going to affect their pocket. So we need to talk in both languages, I suppose. And really, I was going to talk first of all here about what's worked. And again, there's a theme here that resonates back to the cathedral. We have PV cells on top of some of our buildings. They generate 2% of our on-site use for electricity. And as Alex said, we do have a mixed range of buildings across our campuses. And one of the ways that we've achieved where we are today really has been through changes to the estate. So when we've reduced our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 47% since 2004, some of that comes about because of the work that the National Grid are doing around wind power, solar power, etc., and how we get that energy. And some of that change has come around because we've changed some of our campuses. We've taken buildings and refurbished them. We've had new buildings put up which are far more energy efficient. And if any of you know the range of campuses we have, of course, we have Francis Close Hall, which is a range of listed buildings, really, much more challenging, as Anne said, to work with. And then we have the Oxtalls campus, which has some buildings that were put up in 2018. So the range is quite large there. We've also done some sort of smaller scale projects, I suppose, that do have a direct impact. So across the university, teaching PCs, I suppose you could call it, we've replaced the hard drives with solid state memory. They incorporate less carbon to start with, but also use less energy. And then in all our refurbishment projects, we use LED lamps now. To relamp the whole estate in one go would cost, from experience, easily, it would be a £1 million project easily. Whereas if we're doing it step by step, we can incorporate that cost into our projects. If we then start looking at scope 3, we are now in the good position of, we don't send any waste to landfill anymore. We have increased our reuse and recycling. Now there's always more to do there. And as Gary talked about, really, we've tried to engage local suppliers where possible. That's quite a big, it's a challenge in its own way because you've got to get your pricing right, but actually it does come with great benefits. And we have worked with our catering supplier to increase our vegetarian and vegan range. We're nowhere near 100% being vegetarian or vegan. And I think that our kind of customers may not be ready for that yet, but that would be an interesting journey to take. If we now move on, what we're going to do next. So we're faced with some interesting opportunities, I suppose. So one of them is we currently have 78 boilers across our campuses. They're all gas-fired. Really, to get to close to net zero that we can do, we need to change the technology there, move away maybe to electric heating. We still need to reduce our consumption more, partly on that kind of cost-cutting basis, but partly on it's the right thing to do. Some of that will be LED lighting. Some of it will be changing the set points perhaps on our heating during the winter and on our air conditioning during the summer. And that's where the impact of COVID-19 gives us some opportunity, because this winter certainly across our estate at the moment, if in rooms we are using, we're encouraging people to have the buildings open, the windows open to increase ventilation. I don't think in the depths of winter that our heating system will achieve the normal set points, but maybe it's an opportunity to get people used to perhaps working in the winter in a slightly cooler environment and in the summer in a slightly warmer environment. But we're also looking to increase our solar power on site. Our true opportunities, though, for the next steps come in the Scope 3 area. So Scope 3 accounts for, today, roughly 80% of our emissions. So that's our supply base, our commuting to and from work or study, place of study, and our kind of internal travel. So there's some big opportunities there. One of those certainly is reducing the emissions from student and staff travel. So a large portion of our students live within 3 or 4 miles of their place of study. And a lot of them, some walk, some cycle, quite a few travel by car, quite a few by bus. If we can make a mode shift for those people, it would make a big impact, not only on our own carbon emissions, but potentially on the emissions of organisations around us as they see what we've done. We're looking to reduce our water consumption, further increase our reuse and recycling, and perhaps the emphasis should be on reuse there, because as an organisation, we don't buy raw materials, but we do buy services, and we do buy, publications, books, equipment, and we need to find a better way, either within our organisation or across the whole sector, to perhaps share what we buy. So maybe there's a way to buy specific equipment for certain courses that you could share between 6 universities by actually looking at when you do that period of study that needs that equipment. There's those sorts of opportunities. And then, of course, there's the one of working with our suppliers to reduce their carbon emissions. Our main opportunities there would be catering, IT equipment, perhaps our security services as well, because all of those do use carbon one way or the other, either with their suppliers and their travel, or with the raw materials and their equipment, or in the case of security, there's some areas where we can work with them to have them acting perhaps as our eyes and ears to minimise their energy consumption whilst they're walking around doing their kind of security walks. But then the whole plan, I suppose, comes down to how we can increase our student, staff and local stakeholders' awareness of climate change and the steps they could take to prevent that. Now, on the screen there's a couple of just small photos of kind of sustainable travel. One of the opportunities we have in Cheltenham at the moment and in Gloucester is that the County Council has launched a trial e-scooter rental scheme. So that's being rolled out. It's been in place now for 5 weeks, I think. It's quite successful, but it is a real opportunity for people to avoid perhaps the COVID risk they see of public transport, and have a micro mobility solution where they can pick up a transport device, travel where they want, when they want, at a reasonable cost and at very low carbon emissions. So that's one that we've taken advantage of, the students certainly have, but it's one that actually affects our whole, eventually most towns in the county, today just Gloucester and Cheltenham, but actually it's a real opportunity for the cathedral as well, and not Forest Green Rovers yet, and it'll be a challenge up the hill there, but that's one of the opportunities that will come our way, I think. And then really the other one that we've got to do, and again, I think Gary talked about this slightly, is embedding the whole understanding of climate change in your organisation, in your management system, in your managers and the people who buy stuff and who use stuff as well. So we've got some of our journey will be in the kind of finding the right way to educate those people, making the right buying choices, not just based on price. Now, price is important, but actually that complete life cycle, that complete carbon cost needs to be considered and understood by those parties, really. And I was going to talk a little bit more about the hardest parts for us. So, and there's a couple of charts there that help kind of explain that journey. So the one on the left-hand side about Scope 3 emissions. You know, I've already said 80% of our emissions come from Scope 3, so that's our suppliers and our travel. The big green bar there is the total Scope 3 emissions. So you can see since 2012, it's kind of climbed as the organisation has changed what it's done, and our data's got more accurate as well. But over the last couple of years, it started to drop. But at the same time, the carbon emissions from student commuting, which is the purple bar, have generally increased. So we've got work to do there. And that's where that first true hard challenge around cultural change needs to be in place to achieve that net zero. Our students are interested in net zero, but the change we've all got to make, I suppose, is changing that interest into action and understanding that there's a balance between perhaps convenience and climate change and cost and climate change. So all these things may come at a balance point of personal action and personal sacrifice. The second one on that list for us, and it's a big one really, is knowing how COVID-19 will affect learning methods. So as we speak today, we're delivering blended learning. So there's some on-site teaching, there's some remote participation and joining by teams, etc. So far, that's given us a kind of a good view of what could be achieved if we changed how we did stuff. So since March, the university has been, you know, for a few months, obviously we're all in lockdown, so we had a great opportunity to see what we could run by people working from home, etc. Our electricity use dropped significantly in that period, and that gives us a good indicator of what we could do in the future. But it does come at, you know, we've got to get the students engaged in that, we've got to get the right delivery methods, we've got to have the right education still happening, and there still is a need for face-to-face education and interaction in that. I've talked about tackling the Scope 3 emissions, but perhaps that almost can't be talked enough, because it's a major impact for us. It's normally around 70 to 80% for most organisations anyway. And the real one there is finding the way to work with your suppliers to encourage them, help them, get them to understand the message, or otherwise select those ones that do. And that's it's a really important way that we need to change our thinking, that as a business, perhaps we shouldn't only focus on price, we should focus on the whole picture of how those suppliers perform in terms of sustainability, both in terms of the carbon message and that whole kind of culture and how the world is message. And then the last two for us really are obtaining the funding to replace the plant over a 10-year plan, and the thinking change that needs to happen in that. So taking those 78 gas boilers, 10 years isn't a very long to replace those items. Replacing them with energy efficient gas boilers is one thing, but changing that technology to electric heating will require some infrastructure changes. So will be more expensive than just putting a boiler in place. And we need to commit to that 10-year journey. We need to find the funding for it. We need to balance the capital expenditure against the depreciation and find our way forward through that, and not have a plan that says, okay, we're on a 10-year journey, we'll tackle that all in years 7, 8, 9 and 10, because that makes it challenging time-wise, but also quite a financial burden in those years. And the final one I've mentioned there really is delivering net zero whilst we have, ahead of us, we have a demographic in the general population where most of our students are younger people. There's a higher number of younger people coming through the system. We as an organisation are looking to grow. With that growth, will come an increase in the stuff we consume, whether that's electricity, gas, or just suppliers. So balancing net zero whilst also being in a phase of growth is going to be truly interesting. And we need to find those balance points and the way forward across that. Now, my mouse working for a second. Alex, can you give me a time check? I think I'm probably just about on schedule.
Sorry,
actually.
John, I just banged the gong and maybe you didn't hear it. So.
That's weird. No, I didn't hear it at all. I must have been so engrossed in what I was doing. Okay, well,
Brilliant.
I think that is, I believe, my last slide. Yes. So I'll stop sharing now and we can go to the questions.
That's brilliant. Thank you, John, and thank you, Anne. I'm delighted to say everybody's been absolutely brilliant. Top marks to all the students today. They're brilliant presentations who all stayed on time. Well done, everybody. And that means we've got a good 10 minutes or so where we can have a little bit more conversation. Now, there's some really good, interesting questions in the chat. And thank you all so much for putting all these questions in. I don't know whether we will get through absolutely everything, but I'm trying to keep an eye on stuff. And oh, excuse me, I think I managed to share my slide. What I would like to do is just here's a couple of quick ones, which are that there's a question, there's a note in the chat for you, John, which is very helpful, from Pete. Thank you very much, Pete Wiggins. And Gary, if you manage to respond to the chat, there's a little question about kit for you. If you do manage to actually put a little comment in the chat, that would be quite handy. But what I would like to do actually, first of all, is just come into the question about finances. Charlie kindly asked this question at the very beginning, and you know, Veronica, another good colleague of ours, thank you Veronica, also just made a comment there about the challenge of balancing the USP and the profitability and so on. I just wondered whether I could invite all our four panelists to make a little comment about how their organization is walking that line of balancing viability in a financial way with being an ethical organization and making a good response on this agenda. Perhaps you just comment in the order that you spoke, with Becky first.
Okay, so I think it is a difficult one. I think one thing that's key for Interface is that if you actually look at our business model and the stakeholders that we have our shareholders, so our investors, we have our employees, we have our customers, and we have the environment. So whenever we're considering sort of big business decisions, the environment has to be considered because it's considered one of our stakeholders officially. And I think that does change the conversation slightly and ensures that the environment is considered. We have made business decisions to discontinue products where we haven't been able to get transparency from the supply chain. And I think that had potential negative implications in terms of we wouldn't obviously be able to sell that product, and we didn't necessarily have a direct alternative that we could point somebody to. But I think it is challenging. I think having the right setup at a senior level to make sure those decisions are considered and the environment is taken into consideration is important.
Thank you. Gary?
Yeah, I'm sort of following Becky on that one, because be it at FGR or be it Ecotricity, there are certain customers, certain sponsors with the football club that we've just not wanted to engage with because they don't fit with our ethics, with our environmental policy and what we commit to with that. So, there are numerous cases that I can think of offhand where we've said, no, we're not going to work in a sponsorship deal with you, or we're not going to, take you on as an energy customer because actually we feel that what you're doing is wrong. So, again, it's embedding that thought process throughout the whole of your organisation. So it gets to the point that people are taking this as a routine part of their thought process when they're making decisions. And yeah, sometimes there will be more expensive options that are the environmentally, best option to take. But, with that, because your USP is green, your customers, your stakeholders, whatever you want to call them, are expecting you to do that. That should be your driver, that you should think, actually, yeah, it's a bit more expensive, but actually, it's the best course for the environment.
Thank you. And I mean, over to Anne and John, where, the question of the financial line is quite interesting because it's about a bigger question for organisations like us potentially around value. You know, we've got the immediate decision making where people are looking for the bottom line, but then the sustainability agenda is also about our bigger picture of what we're actually trying to achieve purpose-wise for us educating, and how that positive reinforcement loop may attract more students, better research, more impactful research, which then eventually comes around to bringing more money. It's an interesting thing. How's the playoff with the cathedral, Anne, would you say?
We're working through it, I think it's fair to say. So we have committed to adopt a triple bottom line approach, people, planet, prosperity. And that balance in the three is something that we therefore need to consider. What we haven't yet worked out is the process for doing that formally, other than just a kind of bit of a sense check. So that's in our this year's business planning process, to come up with a way that makes that balancing the triple bottom line fit at the cathedral. But what is particularly challenging for us is that as an organisation, our two greatest sources of unrestricted income, and obviously we need that, we need to sort of be able to kind of keep the lights on and keep the doors open. Our two greatest sources of unrestricted income are also our two most problematic carbon areas. So it's our visitor income, be that donations or spend, and it's income from our property portfolio, all of which is listed, a couple of which scheduled ancient monuments. So there is a balancing act to do, and we've just acknowledged, you know, in the last 12 months that it can't just be about the bottom line, it's got to be about welcoming everyone joyfully, our core purpose, but we are on that journey now.
Thank you, Anne. Any more to say, John? I know you kind of alluded to this quite nicely in your thing.
So I suppose, as Alex said, so I'm sort of just 6 months into the organisation, so I suppose I've sort of got, you know, I've got the advantage of being the new person that can ask some innocent questions at times. But from my view at the moment, I think as an organisation, the finance and carbon balance is becoming more understood by the leadership across the organisation. I think there's pockets that understand it really well, and there's pockets that are much more perhaps conventional in their thinking that we will continue to work with. But then the other part of that, I think, is that whole sort of student voice. So I think, you know, I came from the private sector, so it's my first time in the public sector, first time in the education environment. The student voice, there's a lot of quite vocal people that are true believers in this, which is great. But actually the people we probably need to engage in it and win over in a way, and that's where the education side comes in, are the majority of students who probably are interested, but maybe don't understand quite what some of the cost stroke effort stroke carbon balance points might be. And I think that's an important part of the education process, which will then put them out in the big wide world, hopefully with a better understanding of it, and then helping all of us in our further journey.
Thanks, John. There's one question that was mentioned by Pete Barrett, which I thought was quite interesting, and it was talking about the local enterprise partnership and greening, but it also mentioned travel. And actually, you know, rather than trying to sort of tuck into where and where not our local enterprise partnership could go greener, I wondered whether, because we've got FGR, University and Cathedral in the room for Gloucestershire particularly, I wondered, the comment from Pete mentioned cycling and walking and the improvement of infrastructure, and obviously John mentioned we've got the Zwings e-scooters now. I just wondered whether any of you three who are in the region as your base wanted to make any comment about what the top things in terms of travel infrastructure improvement would help you, because we've all got travel as a big headache. Is there anything anybody would want to particularly just mention? Because I know there are a lot of colleagues in the room from local authority and from other parts, useful people in the room.
I suppose, Alex, we've been looking at, as you know anyway, we've been looking at that quite a lot, and because we've had those campuses across both Gloucester and Cheltenham, there are some cycle lanes in Gloucester, there's some cycle lanes in Cheltenham, and there's, the walking routes aren't bad actually, but that sort of cycling bit is really something that probably as a county we need to tackle. It's not easy because keen cyclists will cycle on any road. Cyclists that people aren't cycling yet want a safe route that's probably traffic free, and developing that traffic free route between Cheltenham and Gloucester, which is in the planning stage, would be a great step forward. So there's things that perhaps we can help as customers to the local councils and local authorities by saying that would be a real benefit. So if we could have, if our students, those who were keen to do so, could cycle between Park Campus and Oxtalls or FCH and Oxtalls along a safe route, that would be a big impact. And I think that, would people be able to, would football supporters be able to cycle from here to FGR? Maybe not, might be too far for some, but I think there might be other technologies we could look at. So, e-bikes, e-scooters, all of that in a county-wide scheme.
Thank you. Was there anything else either of you would want to add to that, Gary or Anne?
No, yeah, I think I sort of touched on it earlier. Our main pinch point at the moment is the fact that we're at the top of the hill. So, I think for your cyclists, that will be the killer at the end of their rifle to have to do right up the hill to FGR. We're fortunate in that we're still in a lower league, so a lot of our fans do tend to be local to Nailsworth, so they're walking to the matches anyway. There are various aspects to that travel plan that we still need to look at, especially forward planning for the new stadium.
And I think from the cathedral point of view, the majority of our visitors come by car, which is an interesting one to deal with, and certainly one where I think we just need to be responding to, kind of larger plans for transport. We're part of a cycle route, we've got cycle storage, all of that is kind of in hand at our end, but we know we need to scale up. The other thing that we're going to be putting a lot of effort into, and it's the other side of the coin, is digital. So until recently, we were absolutely adamant that we needed to welcome everybody personally to the cathedral. Now we recognise we can communicate digitally and virtually, so we're about to invest quite a significant amount of money in a digital strategy, new platform and a new digital content officer to make those connections. So watch this space, really.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everybody. Now, I'm very conscious at the time. I think we could talk for at least another half hour, and I'm really sorry to those of you who've put some really interesting stuff in the chat box that we haven't quite got to. And I'm also going to apologise to my lovely panellists, because I did promise them I would give them an opportunity to ask each other questions, but we've run out of time. I think they'll forgive me. It's one of those apologise afterwards rather than before things. Anna, who made a comment about secondary school in Stroud. Anna, on our slide deck, there's a contact point for myself and John. If you would drop us a note, we could pick that up afterwards. And Pete, thank you very much for that very useful comment you've got there about financing and woodland trust schemes and so on and so on. That's really, really useful. So I am going to need to wrap us up. Thank you all so much, everybody in the room, for all this excellent participation. Those have been some brilliant questions, and really, I hope, a very good, thoughtful session for all of us. I know it has been for me. I'm still learning how to spell carbon. I just want to thank you all and have you all join me in what is becoming the new tradition of virtual applause. If you can find your little clappy clappy button, you can press the little clappy clappy button, and let's just give the honorary thanks to these four panelists for some excellent sharing that's really got us under the bonnet of what this mission is all about and what this actually means. Thank you so much, all four of you, for your time. We have recorded this session. We will share it back to everybody who's attended, and you're very welcome to share it onwards. A couple of little pluggy things that we thought might be quite fun just to share with you as we wrap this up. Anne mentioned in her presentation, there's a really interesting half-hour video she's got that goes with the Gaia exhibit and has the artists talking and special content, which should be really terrific. It's well worth a watch. We will share you the link for that. Our friends at Interface and FGR have both got really cool podcasts that you can be listening to. So FGR CEO Dale Vince, who's a well-known voice in all sorts of media, well beyond our region, has got a brilliant podcast called Zero Carbonista. lots of interesting, relevant content there. And Interface have got a wonderful podcast at the moment going along called Designing with the Climate in Mind. There's a whole range of content and some cracking speakers coming into that. We will again share those links with you so that you can go on and enjoy and do some more good listening. And also a little plug from ourselves at the university. My good comrade Miriam, who has beautifully hosted this session for us and made sure that I didn't mess it up. Thank you so much, Miriam. She does a lot of the work with our own student body and our local community, and they've just kicked off a community challenge, we call it. We do this with partnership with the Cathedral each year now, and it's part of our student engagement program called Live Smart, where we try and show a mainstream student audience what it really is to live green, but do that in a way that really speaks to what troubles our students the most: well-being, mental health, financial troubles, all of those things. And we have little mini volunteering challenges that go on in the community challenge each year. We need to devise these little mini challenges. We always do them in partnership with people in our region and little organizations, charities, businesses, whoever you like. This year we need to work out how to do these little challenges in either an online or a COVID safe way. Again, you'll see our contact point in the slides, and maybe Miriam will just drop her email into the chat box right now. But if you're somebody who thinks, oh, that sounds fun, I wouldn't mind to chat with Miriam and the students, and maybe we could come up with a little thing that's a little bit learning, a little bit action, please drop us a line and we can get you involved in the community challenge. That would be brilliant. I think that's us. Our time is well up. And just to say again, thank you so much, everybody. We will wrap up and we will share this recording, and have a wonderful day and an even better weekend when you get there. Thank you.